name is Arjun Malik. I'm a second generation architect. My father Kamal Malik had set up his firm almost 35 years ago. Has been practicing since then. I have joined him in 2005, so it's been almost a decade since I've been with the firm. For us, design is a set of ideas, a set of disciplines, and you can see the list of projects varies from individual homes to commercial spaces to research spaces to hospitality to medical. If it can be designed, we'd like to be a part of it. Irrespective of whether it's a home or it's any sort of architectural project, the first and most important parameter is an understanding of its surroundings. I think the first part applies to any sort of architecture in that space, which means a specific response to a specific place. The second part obviously becomes the program. So that's when I think the house becomes more specific. I think getting below the surface and trying to understand what really drives a client, how they like to live. Number three is then the synthesis of all these parameters. But I think from a design process, there is no template, but I think if we were to construct a template, a very simplified template, that would in a sense be it. It's actually quite strange because the house in question is actually the second house on that hill plot in Alibaug. So it's not a standalone home. The client commissioned a single home at the top of the hill, which I think is perhaps briefly referenced in the imagery as well as the drawings in terms of how the first house came up. That house was on top of the hill. It was designed as a set of cantilevered pavilions. It had a very strong structural vocabulary, which in its sense was quite overt, but it responded to the site in terms of the way it spread its wings over the top of the hill. Now what happened is, as that house was reaching completion, the client decided that he was obviously getting on in years. Very soon after he passed away in most unfortunate circumstances. But before he passed away, he had decided that he had a son and a daughter, but he has a son and daughter. And he decided that when he passed on, he would like to gift each of them a home. They wanted a house identical to the first one in terms of program and size. And their brief in essence was again quite generic. They wanted living spaces, they wanted sleeping spaces, they wanted backup areas, they wanted a pool. They weren't a whole lot more specific than that. The rest of the specificity around the program was built in through the site context, through the existence of a previous house, through the orientation, and through our own, I think, understanding of the process and a continuous dialogue with the clients. I think one of the unique aspects of this house, perhaps of all the homes we do, is there is no designated entry point, no designated egress point either. We just find this issue of doors to be, in a sense, conceptually quite limiting. So technically, there are different ways in which one could get out of their car and enter this house. Either walk directly onto the first level. So the house is spread into two major levels and a third roof terrace level. The upper level of the house is all their public spaces, have their living rooms, their dining room, the kitchen, the major verandas. They've taken all the sleeping spaces to the lower level, slightly more private, clustered around a very large courtyard with trees, clustered around the pool, so you have some sense of privacy. Now, what makes it interesting is the connections between these two levels and the roof. Because the idea, again, of the visuals from the first house to the second, all you actually see is a very simple 75-foot long wall comprised of chain link baskets filled with different sizes of stone. So what we do is we take a very simple element of stone and we start to investigate in which a traditionally heavy element can be made to become light and porous. So we did a number of tests with these chain link baskets, took different sizes of stones, put them in there, arranged them, aggregated them in such a way that light starts to filter in the gap between these stones. So it's quite interesting that during the day you get this almost kind of starry light filtering into the house, and at night the artificial light filters back out through it. The second, of course, is the completely green roof, and there is one single crystalline kind of fragment of concrete which emerges from this, which forms a covered entry from the roof terrace which goes right through the two levels of the house. It's in a sense metaphorical of a journey, of starting maybe even from the first house. You walk through the first house, you walk along the lawn, you come onto this roof, you start to move through this house. Moments of darkness, moments of light, moments of excitement, moments of calm, and you finally emerge almost at the edge of a cliff where you have the infinity pool and then you have a level drop into the bamboo grove and the valley beyond. So I think it's a gradual revelation of space, and that's the way the entire house has been formatted, where each movement and each journey through the house can become a source of comfort through repetition, but also if your senses are highly attuned, each journey becomes a discovery. There's a very solid theoretical analysis of the building machinery, and not just of the building aesthetics. The way the living room opens out into a huge shaded deck with that 50-foot cantilevered zinc roof, the way gardens form on both sides, the way from a dining room I can either use the internal steps of the house to get down to my master bed, or I simply walk out of the dining room and walk along the garden, which forms a smoother kind of contour which goes down and enters my master bedroom veranda. There are many ways to access each space of this house. As we developed the vocabulary of this space, again, just the way that the house was very fluid in its interaction with different parts of its immediate exterior, the construction process also was very similar in that there were a number of materials used. I think the primary material was sheer concrete, which means not a frame structure, but with long raked concrete walls. Why raked? Because there are particular angles of the sun. There were elements in natural stone, which was both harvested from the site as well as from excised portions of that monumental existing retaining wall as we cut openings into it. There was a very powerful element of a lightweight steel roof, which was clad with ribbed zinc, which has cantilevered corner turning free spans of up to 50 or 60 feet, which is a complete engineering nightmare. 27 to 30 feet high, 8-inch thick, 10-degree raked concrete walls, done without any sort of exterior plastering or finish, done with clean edges. In essence, a translation from the very unique structure of the first house, which was more kind of lightweight, a lot of steel, a lot of cantilever expressing filigree structural patterns. This one became a slightly more, I would say, solid, and yet a paradox between heavy and light, between large surfaces of concrete but cantilevered hugely, forming deep spaces below them. It was a very, very complicated construction process. So we finished off this first house, and just as it's finishing, he suddenly commissioned the second home. That actually threw us a bit of a googly, because even a brief glimpse of the first home would, I think, immediately outline some of the problems in that you cannot replicate that vocabulary. It's very, very specific to a site, to a topography, to a particular orientation, to a particular program. So we found our answers in three basic circumstances on site. One, the land's previous owner had started building a home a little further down the site, also with a wonderful perch point overlooking the sea, but it was stopped and left the way it was for almost 2 to 3 years before it was sold to our client. We found that we simply could not interrupt the views of the first house with the presence of a second. What did help us was he had slightly submerged the house into the levels so as to bring it to a certain height where we found it might not interrupt the views of the first house. We drew an imaginary extension of this lawn into infinity, and we found that by gently manipulating the levels of the already existing second house, we could develop a complete green plane that extended from the bottom of the first house and went over the roof of the second, and build the second as a completely submerged entity with pretty much zero visual presence when seen from the first house, which was our intent. As we drove up to site, there was a massive, almost 40-foot high, ranging from 40 foot to maybe 18 feet, very large black local stone retaining wall. But when we began to study that wall, we found that he had built a basement behind it, the previous owner. So in essence, a lot of that wall really wasn't retaining anything. So we found we could cut away parts of that wall to open up beautiful views to the submerged second level of the house. What emerged was a variation of a C-shaped courtyard house. What you essentially have is a merger between a C-shaped courtyard house and a completely submerged burrowed house that's split in various ways to form intermediate courts to bring light, to bring air, to naturally ventilate, because it could not violate the basic principles of tropical architecture.